lovely listeners. Today is all about the future of education. Where is it going and what can we do? I'm joined by two inspirational women, Kathryn Pratt, who's mum of 4 incredible boys and founder of Seweni, which is a social enterprise project which reimagines education. And also by Dr. Caroline Palmer, who's mum of 2, freelance writer, editor and scientist. So welcome to both of you this morning. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
You both all okay, everyone?
Yes.
Yes, you're very well.
So Kathryn, it's over a year ago that we met in that tiny little recording studio with baby attached, breastfeeding, trying to record our little podcast about Seweni, and we were looking at the sort of creativity and where sort of trying to support people thinking about being creative with their children. As I can't believe that time's just flown by, but we're here today to talk about 3 fantastic articles that you guys have produced, challenging the damaging COVID gap narrative, an education system fit for purpose, and envisaging a new era of education, all of which give me goosebumps just thinking about the fact that we could create some kind of change. So we're going to explore those articles, and I will put the links to the actual articles in the show notes and on my social media for anyone who's interested. So the government seem intent on saying that pupils are behind. This is based, I believe, on English and maths test scores.
One of the reports that has come out, yes, is based on English and maths in 6 and 7-year-olds, comparing a cohort from 2017 to the 2020 cohort. And then, yes, the gap, as they put it, in learning as a result of the pandemic.
Which just, you know, it amazes me that that they are that in their brains they're still actually testing, you know, during this period of time. So that for me was like a bit of a, oh my goodness me, I just didn't imagine that would be happening, you know, particularly given the fact that I think in January this year there was still 1.3 million computers to be given to people in situations that need them. So, you know, to get that data, I was a bit like, really? How can they have calculated that?
It doesn't add up on many levels. And I think that as a scientist approaching these results and thinking about what the government are saying with the data that they've got, it's a very poor way to approach things. And essentially what they've asked is, or what they've tested is, whether children have lost national curriculum learning over the past year. What they haven't asked and haven't tested is, have children lost learning? But that's what the headline is. And I think that that's a really significant distinction. And actually, if you're approaching this as a scientist, you would no way be able to extrapolate the data that they've got to conclude that children have lost learning to the degree that they're suggesting they have. And in fact, if you did do that as a scientist, you would be told that you were speculating. So basically what we can conclude is that the government, based on a very thin amount of data, is speculating that children have lost learning. If they wanted to actually ask the question, have children lost learning, then they need to flip it around and say, kids, what have you learned? And go at it like that. So it's a completely backwards approach that only tests whether the national curriculum has been learned this year, which of course it hasn't, because not every child has access to it. And that again falls squarely on the government's shoulders by not providing enough resources to those who need it.
Yeah, and I think what are your initial thoughts around why are they so focused around the COVID gap? So that data actually comes from 2020 data. So they're not, that was just like, I'm guessing that was just from the first lockdown.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because the way I'm kind of looking at it is that learning for the government is a kind of currency, and basically children have these little kind of like pots, if you like, that time in school sort of fills them up. And of course, given that children haven't been in school, there is now a deficit. So what is the solution to this? That this is very visible to parents and to everyone, that children are not, in school. So what's the answer? The answer is more time in school. And we're just seeing now that the government's proposing that holidays get cut into to enable this sort of lost time to be made up for. And again, I mean, that's incredibly damaging, not only in terms of a narrative for the children and the parents to be hearing, but also for teachers who are utterly burnt out now. So I think there's quite a lot. It's a multifaceted thing, and I think that's the kind of the first one really, is that sort of learning currency that the government are kind of talking about. And I think Caroline might want to try and, like, again, like she said, flip it around a little bit, and we'll talk about that a bit later. The other issue is there's obviously a data gap too. Ofsted haven't been able to police schools as much as they would like. There's the sort of safeguarding aspect and the accountability that the government have for that. And the data is also the stick that they use to beat schools with as well. Make sure that they're up to the standards. So there's that aspect of it. Then we've got sort of the narrative of struggling parents as well. Schools are very much childcare. Education's been outsourced for about 150 years. But actually now parents are seeing visibly what children are being asked to do by schools, and that they are switched off from it. Yeah. That they are finding it really difficult, whether it be a sort of situation at home, or really, and that's what Caroline and I are arguing, that it's the stuff that they're trying to sort of cram in, really, the knowledge-rich curriculum that is kind of filling the children up like a sort of bottle, and they're kind of like squishing in all the different facts and figures that children, quote unquote, need to know. So there's that aspect as well. Then there's the mental health aspect,
mental health,
which is huge, and we can talk about that later on as well. And then, as I mentioned before, the sort of the teacher burnout thing, and what they're going to get, I think, from this sort of intimation that holidays are going to be cut into, is that they're probably going to get a union backlash, I expect, from the teachers union, and then that story will kind of become the kind of teachers are letting the side down, in this time of national crisis.
It seems like like the government, I mean, basically they're creating this self-perpetuating cycle where actually they've set the bar, and that's the national curriculum, which most people and teachers and a lot of parents are cottoning on to the idea now that we know that needs to be significantly updated. But that's sort of the government's yardstick, and it's sort of this very narrow-minded approach to education, and thinking, well, we must make sure the children know this amount of knowledge by this point and for the various milestones. And as Kath said, actually, if we're constantly going back and saying, well, have they learned it? Well, they haven't been in school, so they can't have learned it. So it's this sort of loop that we're going around. And as Kath again said, if we're then suggesting that just by giving them more time to learn those things, more time in school, we're still going to have lost learning, because time isn't infinite in a person's lifetime. So when do we stop adding time to this, and when do we take a breather and say, actually, everybody is at their absolute limit? Teachers, of course, children and parents, absolutely. And in fact, coming back to the original sort of part of all of this, is children haven't stopped learning. It's the measures that are totally wrong. We're using the wrong measures and asking the wrong questions. And that's where we just need to press pause and reset and go back to what's important, which is what the children are learning, how they're learning it, and how their mental health and well-being are right now.
Yeah, I mean, you've both touched on the mental well-being, and I think it seems the right moment to sort of say that actually none of this is going to go anywhere unless the children return with with the right mental health. And actually, given what they've gone through, given that their whole way of being educated has totally changed in a short space of time, actually, wouldn't it be sensible for them just to be saying, actually, we're going to allow now a period of embedding, like, lots of techniques to ensure that children are happy, healthy. Those are going to be our measures, and when we've got that in place, then we're going to start to look at learning. That to me seems like the most sensible thing to do, because actually they're not going to learn. They're going to go back, be forced into sort of more learning, longer hours, whatever they're going to put in place. And actually, we all know that children don't learn like that. They're not going to embed it, and it kind of makes me sort of laugh a little bit, because I think for years the government have been wanting schools to embed children's learning. So it's that bit where they say they've got a greater depth of learning, so they might learn their times tables, but now we want to see them use their times tables in situations, which is the greater depth. And actually, by cramming everything in, they're allowing no space or time for children to actually use these skills, which means that they're not embedded, which means they're not going to retain them. So that's why I asked, what do you think is behind the COVID gap? Because for me, it all comes down to economy for me, because I can't understand why the government can't see that they're having to pump loads of money into mental health as it is prior to COVID, and what's that going to look like in the future with the next generation of children going through. And actually, this is the most amazing opportunity to, like you say, use that word reset, to even reset the academic year. We've played around, talked about it for ages, but actually great opportunity, but that's not going to happen. I'm absolutely livid that they are even talking about extending children's hours of being sat at a desk.
Well, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we've all sat at work or somewhere trying to do more and sitting there completely exhausted, completely demotivated, but trying to do more because it's expected of us. I think everyone at some point has experienced that. And that's what we're asking our children to do. I mean, that study that I referred to earlier was for 6 and 7-year-olds. I mean, I was so angry when I read it, to think that they're suggesting that at 6 or 7 they need extra lessons to catch up on what? What about catching up on their childhood?
Mm-hmm. So we're not learning anything from countries like Finland and that start later, where their children are ready. They're ready to write. They're physically ready. They're mentally ready. They need that space to play and explore and develop. And actually, all we're doing is crushing that.
I think that's completely true. And I think even just those extra couple of years as really being kids and not having to sit inside 4 walls and sit still at a desk for a really long chunks of time for that age group, it also gives children a chance to find sort of their foundation a bit more, like who they are and what their place in the world is, and actually what they think about things, and just gives them a bit more of a solid footing to then be thrown into a system where there's so many ideas and thoughts and children, sort of buffeting them around in different ways. And actually, I think that opportunity for just a little bit more personal growth and development and sort of solidifying who am I is hugely important. And when we bring that back to the mental health conversation, again, I think that only serves to sort of bolster children's mental health.
And then you think we've got a government that has, there's been an almighty sort of omni shambles really in terms of school openings. We had children going back for 1 day after Christmas and mixing and then a national lockdown. And so there is a huge amount of like communication issues and all that sort of stuff. And what they're looking for is that shiny PR story, really, similar to what's happened with healthcare with the vaccine story, that it sort of trumps. It's a really positive thing. This is the government's new strategy. They've got a new chap, Sir Kevin, who's going to be in charge of the catch-up program, and by all accounts, he sounds like a very sort of well well informed and powerful kind of character. And I think in the Times Educational Supplement, was it yesterday, there was a lovely article about him. So there's a lot of hope that he might well do some good things, but this is where we need to kind of like start to shift the dialogue really from lost learning to, you know, it's lost time in school.
And those two things are hugely different.
Yeah,
and the difference in their meaning, I mean, it's so significant. And that's where, again, as a scientist, my brain just keeps going back to the data. So, well, actually, you've got to ask the right questions for your data set. And this hasn't been about what children have learned and what they have potentially lost. It's been about national curriculum and data and statistics, specifically about how the government school system hasn't worked in this situation.
And that's what really worries me, is that there is research, there is statistics and data to say that children do very well in different learning environments than the school system. And this isn't new, is it? You know, like, this is like hundreds of years ago. Charlotte Mason, John Holt, Peter Gray, they've all done, you know, fabulous bits of research, as have other educationalists more recently, but they seem intent on not being able to expand their thought process about what data could mean in terms of like the future of how, I don't want to use the word successful these children are, but how
their achievements and their development, I mean, really, and they're sort of gearing up for adult life, because that's what it's about. And I think you're right. I mean, that everybody in the government particularly is so entrenched in this idea that, you know, we have to follow the national curriculum, excuse me, and we have to go to school and we have to study for a certain amount of hours. And this, you know, it's like climbing up this ladder that's sort of preset and predetermined. And if we tick boxes on the way, woo, that's really good. And that's what sort of the government are doing. They're like, hang on a minute, we haven't ticked the boxes for 2020. Let's panic, and we've got to go back and we've got to work harder, push everybody harder so we tick those boxes. And it's nonsensical. And I think, as you said, there have been teachers and people and educators for years, for decades, beating this drum, saying, what are we doing? This is not the best way children learn. Let's change. And I think what Kathryn and I really sort of realised, and what sort of instigated us to write these articles, was just this enormous realisation that now is the time. Like, we have an opportunity to stamp our feet and wave our arms and shout really loud and say, actually, that system is not working. And we know that this system, or some version of this, is going to work much better. And what we've got now, which I think is potentially really powerful, is we've got parents who have seen their children at home. So we have children who have seen, as you said, what the school is sending home, worksheet after worksheet, and all various things that their children aren't particularly engaged in. And they've seen their children when they're not sat in front of their schoolwork, and watched what they're exploring and doing and how much fun they're having. They've been chatting to their kids out on walks and talking about science and maths and art. And actually those connections, that deeper learning that you referred to earlier, that the national curriculum and the government are always trying to get, well, that's happening naturally through communication in this home situation. So actually, if we were to release children from shackles, as Kathryn puts it, of the education system and this constant testing, I think looking back and watching them, many people will just be astounded at how fast they can achieve and develop and learn once they're released from sort of the rigidity of the national curriculum.
Yeah, it's funny because I often say to homeschoolers, you know, parents will contact me and say, like, they're so worried that their 9-year-old child is you know, not really able to read or write. And I would say to them that, you know, and actually many homeschooling children don't until they're about 10 or 11, but when they do, they fly with it. And actually the realization for me as an ex-head is that I can support my child to read in a very short space of time. You know, actually, if they're 8 and they just start showing an interest in reading, they can be reading really fluently within a month or two.
Yeah, it takes 30 hours to learn to read.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And actually, but by drilling them from 4 and 5,
They're not
or
ready.
even 3 with phonics, what are we doing? We're spending 4 or 5 years teaching them to read, when actually,
it's such a waste of energy on everyone's part. It's, you know, it's just throwing stuff to the wind, isn't it? And sitting them down at desks and tables. So you've got to stay here. You've got to read this till you can make sense of it. You know, when their brains are exploring and bursting out with all these ideas in other directions that they could learn in so many other ways that are appropriate for their age group or for where they happen to be on sort of their developmental scales and things. But no, it's just so rigid. And what's been fascinating for me, because of course Kathryn and I come from totally different perspectives here, in that Kathryn's been home educating from the get-go. Her kids have never seen the inside of a school, I don't think, which is fantastic. Whereas I, having known Kath for a while, we've had quite a lot of conversations, even when my eldest was quite little. And so I've sort of understood and listened to Kath's perspective and these sort of things. But when it came to school time, I didn't have the courage really to sign, or to not sign up my eldest to school, because I felt like there wasn't really anything to catch me and I wasn't really sure what I was doing. So what's been fascinating this year for me is that I've had the confidence to let go of that system. Most of that confidence was given to me by Kathryn, and an immense amount of support from Kathryn and Saweni. And in doing so, it's really opened my eyes up to what needs to happen as a parent going through that transition, if you like, from sort of letting go of the school system, which we're so used to and so indoctrinated into, to letting your children just be and thrive on their own, but noticing those nuggets of learning. Because I think initially, after I sort of let go of this school system and the national curriculum, I was kind of panicky and anxious about the fact, you know, are they learning? Are they not? How do I know? And again, my scientist brain is constantly going, well, how do I measure this? I want to know, you know, what's happening. And of course, that's really difficult to do if you've just let go of the measures. And of course, it took me a little while to settle into the fact that actually they are learning all the time, and it's just shifting your perspective and shifting the way you measure things. So instead of thinking, okay, well, she's read, you know, 2 pages of this text, which I know they read at school, you go, well, actually, she's read all these signs on her walk and she's looking up lyrics, and it's just trying to find different ways and observing when they are actually learning, and not having to constantly refer back to sort of this national curriculum standardized way of ensuring progress. And it's been so liberating and so exciting to watch these little people sort of explore and develop and learn, and their learning has totally skyrocketed. I mean, they have knowledge that I have got no idea about. I mean, my son, what he doesn't know about World War II, I mean, honestly.
He is amazing. You sent us a quiz the other day and I was just, wow. Yeah. It's all about making that environment conducive to maximum sort of well-being, really, and creating that sort of soil, if you like. I think Ken Robinson always used to use that analogy. He used to say that education should be a bit more like organic agriculture rather than in sort of intensive farming, and I very much sort of subscribe to that. I sort of imagine, in a way, we've got kind of the government's idea of education being like you're in this greenhouse with all these little saplings in these little separate pots somehow, and they're kind of you know, they're all in this sort of like tiny little bit of soil, and they're all getting a little bit of water, and they're all getting the same stuff, and some are gonna do okay, some are probably not. The ones that are growing a bit wonky get snipped and all sorts of things. Anyway, and I thought about the Eden biome and thought what we really need is that kind of version of education. We need like fantastic soil and a really, really cool kind of building, and loads of really interesting seeds, loads of really interesting gardeners to tend these seedlings, and then just see what happens. That's the exciting thing, is that with children you never know how they're gonna bloom and where they're gonna go, and what it is that's going to spark that curiosity and take them on that kind of learning cycle, you know, up towards their kind of big actualization of dreams, and then kind of like the reality kind of hits, and like, oh, actually, what can I do? And then, oh, I'm in a struggle pit. I don't know where to go. I'm stuck. I need some help. And then sort of making their way out of that to a sort of path to success, and then being able to share their incredible learning with the world in whatever way it is, be it like a little bit with a grandparent or something, or whether they want to do a big website, or whether they want to kind of, do a presentation, or whatever it might be. And it's creating that, absolutely, that soil, I think, is I've got in my mind. And when we were doing Seweni, we figured out there were sort of 8 kind of crucial things that we realized that the children needed, and we called them the thrive elements, kind of like the fertilizer, if you like. So there was safety, purpose, nature, value, connection, trust, agency, and freedom. And I think all of those 8 things seem to really help the children's well-being. And the grown-ups all around were sort of there helping ensure that all of these aspects were there, and that the children weren't sort of wobbling in any particular one area, and then it was amazing. It was, as you say, the learning skyrockets with that crucial bit of authentic need as well. Children's like, oh, I've got a spark, off I go.
What I love about your description is that, I'm visualizing these seedlings growing, and it just seems so natural and organic, and I think that's the tricky thing, isn't it, that what the government have put in place makes no space for children to grow and flourish at different times. And I can only think back to my experiences ahead, and being Ofsteded and being absolutely grilled in my office about why some children hadn't made expected levels, yet I could tell them the most detailed story about how they lost a parent this year, and and they've been very unwell themselves, and actually, but there's no room for that. Yet in your description, where they bloom and they, sometimes they go a bit sideways and then they straighten up a bit, I think we know enough. We know that these children make it, that they're all going to be okay, but it just doesn't seem enough for the government, that sort of verbal explanation of these children and these people, knowing them inside out and knowing their stories and knowing that they're, it's that element of trust, and it's like they don't trust
exactly what I was going to say. The element that's missing is trust. The government don't trust that the children can do it, and they also don't trust that the teachers have the know-how and know what's best for their children. And that is going to be, for any kind of reform, instilling that trust and gaining that trust is going to be, I think, paramount. And I think, but again, I think even though I think because we come from generations and generations of having this sort of top-down approach to things, where instructions are given and then they're followed, and that's come from, well, the government give instructions on how education should be, the teachers follow those instructions, they give them to the children follow those instructions. That's very much how it's been. And what we're saying is like, no, we're not there anymore. We don't need children who can just follow instructions. We need children who can innovate and create and problem solve and actually fix the mess of the planet that our generation and the previous generations have created. So in my mind, we very much have a responsibility to ensure, as the generations who have harmed the planet that our children will inherit, we have almost a duty to ensure that they are provided with an education that nurtures and nourishes, and that we trust them, that given all of those elements, those thrive elements, that they will be able to create magical and wonderful things and come out as amazing young adults that are competent and caring and compassionate, and then themselves can thrive in this world. And I think that lack of trust is really sort of the missing component of this, because let's face it, the evidence, the research and the theory on education and how children learn best is there. We know that 21st century skills are long overdue being taught in schools or encouraged in schools. And so actually, if you think about it and you break it down, actually what the missing element is trust, and also the government accepting that perhaps they don't have it quite right. And I think from there we can sort of move upwards. And in developing that trust, I think, again, referring to this powerful platform I think that we've got now, which is the parent and also the teachers, but the parents who've had their kids at home, to be able to provide examples and say, look, we can trust the kids. Look, I did nothing basically and they learned. Look, it's magic. All I did was ensure they've got food and water and safety. But talking about those Thrive elements that Kathryn raised, they are hugely important. But I think it's really important to note that a big, in my opinion, failing of the government has been to not ensure that a huge proportion of the nation's children have those Thrive elements, or even not those Thrive elements, not even as much as that, but just those basic survival needs of safety and food and security. And also what's so needed in this 21st century is access to the internet and to a solid connection. And if we're going to sort of launch an education revolution or move forwards from this decrepit, broken system that doesn't work for our kids, that needs to be a hole that is well and truly plugged in how the government responds and reacts and moves forward with this, because we can't leave those kids behind. We can't say, actually, it's okay for the kids who got access to all these things at home. Look, they've learned amazing things during COVID. You know, there are going to be children who haven't had those wonderful opportunities because they haven't been in a home situation that's afforded them. And I think that's awful, and that needs to be sort of overtly addressed.
Although in my heart, I know that, you know, a lot of these children that are left to their own devices, and, you know, that's really frowned upon, actually, you know, they do have a lot of these skills that we're looking for. They, you know, the ones that can go out and sort of, I don't know, sit in the stream for 3 hours and be picking at mud, and sort of parents don't really know what they're doing or where they are. They, you know, they are learning. They are. So I think it is untrue or unfair to say that, you know, it's children from deprived families and children that haven't got any sort of parental input are also not learning. But one point I really do want to make is that I genuinely believe that almost all leaders and teachers and teaching assistants in schools will put their hand on their heart and say they totally agree with this reimagining of a new education. This what's being delivered. I you know, my heart's really gone out to teachers during this sort of lockdown and the criticism that they've had from parents, quite rightly so, but it's criticism about the curriculum. It's not about the teachers, and the teachers want to break free from this. But actually what the government did was they said, okay, we'll all be part of multi-academies. So schools lost their ability to create curriculums that were about their community, their environment, all these lovely, oozy, beautiful things that used to go on in and around schools. They became part of these multi-academies that were like, no, we're all going to deliver maths like this. We're all going to do, you know, from a business model, not from a child-led model. And I feel sad that, you know, 12 years ago, we were talking about every child matters. Now we're talking about children sitting at desks for longer during the day. Like, we, in a very short space of time, we've gone even further backwards than we ever had. So bearing that in mind, sort of brings me to the sort of, you know, looking at your last article, which was like re-envisaging, like, what does education look like? What can we do? What does it look like? What can we do as parents and educators and all sorts? How can we move this forward?
So
shout about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about education, you know, it's an outcome oriented thing. It's you know, we're focused on the exams at the end of year 11 and A levels, and parents are wanting, you know, reassurance that their children are on a path to have successful, sort of financially secure lives. I mean, though all of those kind of those securities and uncertainties rather are now uncertain, given our current situation and the sort of various things that are now facing the world. So with coronavirus and climate change and world recessions, and these things are going to come crashing down on our children sequentially. So the outcomes of education are now in question. So, and they're also the things that cause the most amount of stress as well. I mean, Priya Lakhani, she's done a wonderful book called Inadequate, which is called The System Failing Our Teachers and Your Children. I highly recommend it. Came out last year. And she talks very much about the outcomes of education. And what I think we need to do is to completely shift what these tests and things are, and for it to become a much more a digital sort of portfolio of children's project cycles from when they're really little, can be, to just follow their passions and their enthusiasms and the things that spark their authentic need. And you'll notice if you follow a project cycle, you'll see in one of the articles, I think it's the second one, there's a sort of figure that shows the project cycle that I described earlier. And if we can kind of show those, they are absolutely bursting at the seams with the 21st century skills. So the sort of creativity, where ideas and experience kind of come together and sort of explode into new ideas. Collaboration, looking for the right person to help you with this particular thing. It can be world experts, or it can be your next door neighbour, that sort of stuff. Then we've got communication, being able to communicate digitally, speaking, oracy skills, that sort of thing, a lot of public speaking, doing podcasts. And then there's critical thinking too. Obviously, that's looking at complex problems and making decisions based on a lot of different data points, if you like. So there's and then there's all the life skills as well, things like leadership and initiative and the sort of what people call soft skills, but they're absolutely not. They all feed into this sort of this thing I think Simon Sinek calls it's attitudes. And you don't hire someone for their skill set necessarily. You hire them for that attitude, that character that they have, that they are innovative and able to be able to take on uncertainty and really run with it. And I think that's absolutely key. So I think if we had a digital portfolio that really showed children in all of those different areas, that would be pretty special. And what you might be able to see is if these things were anonymized, for example, you'd be able to see different colors, maybe where children show particular leadership skills or innovation skills, or maybe they're more of a follower, or maybe they're a realist and they really like the nitpicky detail. But those are sort of kind of colors that sort of flash out at a potential employer and say, oh, you know what we need in this team? We need someone who's an innovator, but who's also really good at detail. So we can kind of like see really quickly, snapshot, this person here looks like they could be great. And it takes away all of the the unintentional bias and things like that as well, potentially. So I think education could become a really exciting thing if we focus more on the story of each child rather than the snapshot of an exam, which I think is totally and utterly outdated now. And how exciting that could be, and then what that would feed into the education system would be really interesting, because suddenly if you've got a different outcome, the trickle down effect of what would then happen even in early years would be fascinating to see. That everyone would be kind of like, or you can put this in your folder, or you can put this in your portfolio, blah, blah. And parents would be on board as well, because they'd be able to see visibly how their child was developing. My son just really into performing. He loves it in every way, shape or form. World War II has very little idea about, but
yeah,
at the moment he's trying to absolutely become Lord Voldemort.
I think Kathryn, you've absolutely encapsulated in that little example of our two sons and their differences, sort of the whole point of this, and why revolutionizing education is so important, because it doesn't, to some degree, it doesn't matter what those knowledge nuggets are, because now everybody can access information almost immediately. So it's not the information in itself that's important here, yet that's what schools are all about, just feeding information. But actually we can pick up a phone and Google anything and come up with a reasonable answer. But what we do need to know is how to tell whether that answer is the correct answer, and it's whether it's enough of an answer to answer our question. And those skills are the ones that evolve around this gathering knowledge and information and exploring and testing and trying, those 21st century skills. And so in the same way that your son might not know much or anything about World War II at the moment, he's got, reams of knowledge and experience in another direction, in performance. My kids edging their way towards exploring performance and stuff like that, but they're not quite there yet. And those skills, again, with performing, as you said earlier, are great for 21st century skills and living in this era when we do need to communicate, we do need to shout loudly about the world to try and fix it and change it and nudge it in the right direction. So those skills are amazing to have. But if you try and fit those into the national curriculum at different levels, well, are they valued as highly as maths and English? And actually, we can all use spell check. Do we need to do year one spelling tests? So it all comes sort of full circle, and you realise, actually, could this be really the right way to do it? Now, the thing I think to consider, and that sort of collectively needs to be acknowledged, particularly if we are going to move forward into this idea of more of a digital portfolio and that kind of thing, is the end point or the outcome, as you said. And of course we would need to have buy-in, if you like, from people who are going to be receiving this end product of this amazing child that's come through this wonderful system. So those will be sort of the companies in the future, and universities, if they're still around. And so they need to be able to say, okay, yes, this looks like a really good way to do this. I'm going to also change my systems and my way of assessing. And that, I think, is also a really important component of this whole discussion that we're sort of having and instigating, because I think when people pause and just think about it for a minute, most organizations and companies, and even universities, if they think really hard about it, realize that actually this is a much better way of assessing, if you like to use that word rather reluctantly, the potential of a person that you're going to work with or want to employ. And I think there are companies who are already thinking about this and are already sort of forward facing, but I think it is going to need, we've got to come at it from both angles, really, because we can't generate a product that then's not going to be acknowledged in the real world. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that is what would occur, but I think the conversation needs to happen on both ends.
And in your articles, I love the fact that at the end you put join the education revolution. So here's some things that you can do. And I think it's a beautiful list for parents to engage in, and to just think that actually they can make a difference. Parents are voicing how they feel about the curriculum, but you list things like, for one, tell your children that they're incredible and they're not falling behind. Really, really beautiful. I'm so glad you started with that. 2, start documenting your children's learning and project cycles with photos and videos. I will just plug Collage there. I've created an app that does that. 3, write to your MP and ask for change, and you've even put a draft letter in there, so that's a really invaluable tool. Join the Rethinking Education community and dive deeper into current thinking on education reform. Lovely that people can actually get involved and hear what other people are saying, and add your voice to the rethinking assessment. And finally, write to your children's school and ask them to support education reform and help your child to develop 21st century skills. If I'd been a head teacher and I'd received those letters, I would have loved to have had that debate with parents, open up the forum. What is it you feel? In fact, it's a really great exercise for parents to do, is just to write down on a piece of paper, what would they see, hear, their child doing or or acting or being or looking like when they deem them to have finished their sort of education period, because actually those skills that come out, I bet, will be those 21st century skills. They won't be about, I want them to have 5 GCSEs, I want them to, I really don't think they will. So I just think your articles are just fantastic. They're really sort of, they're not long, they really encompass everything that is going on right now, and I just love the fact that they involve us, so there's something that we can take from that and we can do. So I just want to say, you know, thank you for your time getting together and producing that, because it's easy for us all to go off in silo and kind of be doing our own thing or having our own thoughts, but to actually sort of create a community where we can really delve deep and try and make change, just feels really fantastic. I think we could, sorry, go on Caroline.
No, I was just going to say that I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there a little bit. I mean, Katie and I have sort of been ranting over WhatsApp backwards and forwards about the news headlines and things like that, and we suddenly thought, let's just get this down, because if we're thinking it, other people are going to be thinking it. And I think sort of a really important thing to note and to say is that actually, if we are genuine about making change, then we are going to need as many voices as possible and as many people to get on board from whichever nook or cranny, from whichever, whether you're a parent, teacher, just a member of the community who wants change, you can see the positive impact that it can have. And I think that that's sort of really what we're saying as well, by those points at the end, sort of get involved. We need you. If this is going to change, then we need every single person to make some noise for it. Otherwise it won't happen.
Yeah. And let's change the kind of, you know, shiny PR story to being one of incredible change, that the government's committed to making sure every single child has digital access, that they are going to look at the exam system and 21st century skills, and actually, rather than this country being left behind, which we will be if we don't change very soon, then this is going to be their funky new education system. And I think, you know, teachers being retrained as mentors and guides, so they're there to sort of nudge children with sort of a, you know, nugget of maths or literacy, you know, as and when they need it. I think that would be so powerful, and I think teachers would jump at that chance.
Facilitating learning instead of that didactic approach. Delivery. I agree. I think it would be fab if we could get together in a couple of months' time and just do another session about where have we come from, what's gone on since now. You know, if you have time, because I know you've got so many things and projects going on. But thank you both so much. I really enjoyed talking about sort of future of education. You've really given me hope, and I love your articles, and I think, you know, hopefully from this this will reach many more people. So thank you very much for today, and to you lovely listeners, please keep your questions coming if there's anything you want answered, but until next time, keep calm and carry on dreaming.